It's one of the things that's important in discipleship is that you get in another person's shoes. And I was sharing at the break what a privilege it's been for me over the years in discipling people and sit down and to be able to take their history and them tell me about their life. Because I've only lived one life, my life. But when someone opens the door and allows you to share in their life, it's a real privilege. And you can begin to see the world from their shoes. When you think about it, the only frame of reference you have generally is from your own shoes. And you've been living in those X amount of years, viewing things from your personality and viewing things from your past and from yourself. And it's the only frame of reference that you have. And so that's the frame of reference you use when you look at other people's behavior. And you're just so dead sure that you know exactly what the people around you are up to. And you're just dead sure that you know exactly what your husband and your wife are thinking and what their plan is. And sometimes it just gets ridiculous. I mean, do people actually get married and say, I do, and then when they turn around and they're headed down the aisle, they look at each other and say, hey, in about 10 years we can go to counseling? Is that what they're looking forward to? Or are people actually plotting and planning your destruction? I mean, does Betty, is her life really that shallow, and is she that bored that right now while I'm away from home, she's got her list going and she's saying, when he gets back, I know what I got, that'll push him right over the edge. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'm going to move this and move that. I'll put another bed out in the shed where he thinks he has his study. We'll have one more kid out there. See how he gets on with that. Do you think she's making a list like that? Does she believe that I'm really driving along in the car making those kind of lists to make sure that she'll be miserable? Well, we think that we know it all. And we have these collisions again in our own pride because we haven't taken time to even find out what the person is thinking or what they really mean. We just make assumptions. And we start at a point of oneness and we begin to spread apart. And if we spread long enough, we reach a place called emotional divorce. And here's what emotional divorce is. With my mind, I'm running away from divorce. I know that we're married and that I love you and we're Christians and we have kids and all of those kind of things. I'm running away with my mind, but in my emotions, I've already dumped you and I've headed toward divorce. I've already emotionally divorced you. Not only do we do this in marriages, we do it with friends, we do it in relationships, we do it in our churches. Now, when mind and emotions run in two different directions, and I'm sitting there thinking, I can't justify this, and yet in my emotions, you'll never meet my needs, you'll never understand me, we'll never be able to communicate, we'll never be able to get along, I've got an incredible conflict going on as those two are hitting every day. Something has to change in me because I can't handle this pressure any longer. Now, what's going to change in me? Will I begin to change what I think, or will I begin to change what I feel? It's an interesting thing that people never will change how they feel. And you've had people that you've had relationships with or that you've known, and they feel a certain thing about you, and no matter what you do, it's not going to change. I've met people who have never met me before, but they have all these feelings about me, and you can see in their head they're not quite sure what to do with you because you're not meeting up to the feelings that they had. They're all ready to reject you, and they feel this, and they believe you've been saying this, and they find out that you weren't. We'll never change what we think or what we feel. We'll only start changing what we think. And here's how we change what we think. We put the other person under the magnifying glass. We've predetermined what they're like, and we look for all the behaviors that prove what I feel about them. And now this person's in a lot of trouble because if you do anything on a scale of 1 to 10, it'll be a 10. So once you feel that this person never listens to you, you'll ask them one little question, and it doesn't matter if they're bleeding to death and looking at their wound. If they didn't answer you, it's a 10, and it proves what you felt about them. It's not very fair at all. And you'll see people who've decided to leave, and emotionally they've divorced, And it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to change what they feel. And a sad thing is to see a woman who's been given a list of 100 things that she needs to do to change for her husband to stay. And if she keeps all 100 of those things, when this dynamic is taking place, I'll promise you that he'll have 101 for her when it's all done. Because there's no intention of it getting resolved. And then you'll even see people who will actually get themselves physically sick over what's taking place in their emotions. And I've had that many people come to me and say, do you know the doctor himself, the physician, said, I need to get a divorce to get out of this or I'm going to kill myself. I've just got to do it physically. They've gotten so sick over this thing. And again, what they're saying is that they know you perfectly. Well, how well do they know you? They're viewing you through a pair of glasses called their own unique self or their personality and their own past and their own flesh, and yet we know this person perfectly well. Now, once we do this again, we won't back out. We've got to prove our perception of that person. So here's kind of what that looks like. How many issues are there in marriage? Well, thousands. As I said, the marriage bed's an incredible bed. It's the most crowded bed in the world because what you throw into that bed are your past relationship, your kids, your family, your hurts, everything else is in that bed when you get in there. There's hundreds of issues in marriage. The three main issues that we talk about and cause the most conflict is money and the kids and sex. Those are the three main issues. Now, as we discuss those issues, one of the things I'll do with a couple is this. You've been living together for 5 years, you've been married, and you've been having these collisions, and you've developed a concept of the other person. Would you please describe for me your wife and what she's like at her very worst? And at this point in counseling, after we've gone through everything else and laid this foundation, you'll have a fellow who's bitter there, and he says, I'm glad we finally got to this. We're getting to something important. And I was wondering when we were going to come to this because you've been just talking and talking and talking this Jesus stuff, but we're getting to the real problem. And I said, well, would you describe the words here that describe her? Yes, I will. She's a very, very controlling person. Oh, I'm glad you put self-centered here. It's one of the most self-centered people I've ever seen. Very, very bitter woman. That's true. Unsupportive. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't married her. She gives absolutely no support. There's no way to please her at all. And you're right. She is a complete hindrance. So now he's described his wife at his worst, how he sees her. The next question is to the wife, how do you see your husband after 5 years of marriage and these collisions? Well, it's always fun to watch because after he's done this to her, all she does is this. There he is. He's legion. I'm living with a demon. He's every one of these things. Now, once we've decided that this is what the other person is, every time an issue comes up, you'll notice the issue is never discussed. Instead, it's used as an avenue and an opening to confirm and to debate what you believe about the other person and to prove what's the worst about them. So it's fun to have couples, and I have them do this, tape record their arguments because I need a laugh every once in a while. And it's fun to bring an argument back. And the arguments go something like this when they're living in this model. The husband says to the wife, should we buy our daughter a car? That's the discussion. And her response is, you never support me in front of your parents. What does that have to do with the car? And his response is, if you weren't an idiot, I could. And her response is, I knew when my aunt told me I shouldn't have married you, I shouldn't have married you. And it goes back and forth like that. And all it is a bunch of reactions that are rooted in things of the past and the deep hurts and my perception of the other person. But they never do deal with the real issue. Now, does anyone here think that's pathetic besides me? That I've made the goal of my marriage the proving of how bad you are. I shared this with some of you, but I had a lady who sat in the office and gave me a bleeding ear for 20 minutes about what was wrong with her husband and how bad he was, and he was this and he was that, and we went through every one of these lists, and she had proof for how he'd done every one of these, and she kept talking and talking and talking until finally I just said, that's it, that does it, that settles it. I got up and I walked over to my bookshelves, and on the bookshelves I have a big knife that I was given in Africa, and I pulled the thing out of the sheath and I headed over to the guy. And his eyes got big and he goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to kill you. You're taking up space. You're taking up precious air. I'm going to kill you. Your wife has finally convinced me that you need to die. The only way out is death. I never met anybody like this. Killing you'd be equal to killing Stalin, getting rid of Hitler. At least we're going to be through with you. Well, they were both pale, and she's looking at me, and finally got the message. I mean, is that where all this is supposed to end in the end? That we just debate this, who's the worst person till we finally kill you? Now, there's another way to live. Have we ever thought about going back and looking at the desire of a person's heart? And so I'll ask the wife, would you tell me what the desire of your heart is? I don't want to know you according to the flesh. Paul says, I know no man according to the flesh. You'll never get anywhere ministering to people's flesh. You never will. Even if that's true, you won't get anywhere. Because we say this, that if Christ is my focus, then my problems are there, but they don't bother me. But when my problems are my focus, I can't see Him and I'm undone. If you're putting people's eyes on their flesh, you're actually driving them farther and farther away from the solution and the answer. If the people around you are in the flesh, take some time and put your eyes on Christ. That'll change everything because His life will flow and you'll see exactly Jesus. You won't get anywhere ministering to people's flesh. One of the stories I like to tell is about a fellow who he'd been in prison. He was rough. I mean, he was really a rough guy. I'd met his son, and his son had come to the Lord. This guy had been in some of the worst prisons in the U.S. In fact, he told me one of the things that he did when he got in prison the last time, he traded his carton of cigarettes for a big knife, and the first guy that bumped into him, he cut his arm off. That's how he started things out. This guy was rough. And he ended up becoming a Christian, giving his life to the Lord. And his wife called me one day, and she said, my husband he worked for 2 weeks, and he cashed his check, and what he's done is he's just spent it all on cocaine, and he's locked in the room, he's angry, and he's going to do cocaine all weekend. And I said, well, put him on the phone. They had an extension phone in there. And I said, what's going on? He said, what do you think's going on? Exactly is going on what my wife told you is going on. I took my check, I bought a bunch of cocaine, and that's what I'm doing for the weekend. And I started laughing on the phone. And he said, what are you laughing about? And I said, because you're going to go flush all that cocaine and you wasted your money. He said, I'm not going to flush all the cocaine, I'm going to use it. I said, no, you're not, you're going to flush it all. He said, I'm not going to flush it. And I said, you are. And he said, why would I flush it? And I said, because, brother, you love Jesus. I know your heart for the Lord. And I said, brother, I really need you. And if I'm taking a trip, I would rather have you with me than have the pastor with me. Because I've seen you when your focus is on Christ. And I've seen how you move with people, and I've seen your compassion. And I've seen, and it really wasn't you, it was Christ through you. And I said, all you've done is gotten mad and got your eyes off of Him. Get your eyes back on Him, you'll be right. But the thing is, I said, you won't go on and do this because of your heart, and I know that you love Him too much. You just won't do it. So I said, you've wasted your money. He slammed down the phone. That was it. The next day he called me and he said, you know what? I wasted all that money. I just flushed the cocaine. If you minister to people's hearts, they'll rise up to where their heart really is. If you minister to their flesh, they're just going to go down in the flesh. It was like the time in Australia, and the pastor said to Ray, brother, he said, you got to preach on sin all week to the youth because the youth's involved in immorality. They're all involved in fornication. He said, I want you to preach all week on fornication. And Ray said, well, what have you been preaching on? He said, oh, every week fornication. It just keeps going up. Well, I wonder why. That's all anyone's focused on. And Ray said, well, we won't be doing that, brother. We'll be talking about Jesus the whole week. Do you know the pastor called later and he said it's amazing the impact, how the kids have fallen out of all of that. They're not into that anymore, and how much they're talking about Christ. Do you know the heart of the person next to you? And you ask a woman, describe your heart. And she'll say, well, you know, my real desire is I want to be a godly woman. I want to be a godly wife. I want to be a godly mom, a blessing to others, and encouragement. I want to be a light to others. Now, you got to keep the husband from interrupting by saying, but. Or why then? Because we're looking again at what the real heart is. And then I'll ask the husband, well, what about you? Describe yourself. Well, I want to be a godly man, and I want to be a godly husband, a godly father. I'd like to do His will. I want to be an example. I want to set the goal of loving and forgiveness. I want others to see that. My question then is, well, how much time have you spent? 95% of your time driving around and thinking of all the things that prove this instead of looking at this in your mate's life and encouraging that. One of the things about Betty and I is that though we're apart a lot, I know very few other couples that spend as much time with each other as we spend. And by that, I mean real time together in real communication. And one of the things that I've done all these years is I still pursue her and I still date her. And she's gotten used to that over the years, over the surprises that are coming. But she doesn't know. Like right now, I'm planning a date this week, and she doesn't know what it'll be. And sometimes I'll call her and I'll say, okay, you're picking me up at the airport. When you pick me up at the airport, you make sure you have your little bag packed because I got a surprise. And I'll have some little thing planned. So I always have these dates. And I could say that I'm still dating Betty after all these years. We still date a lot. And I tell her how important that is for me. Well, I was out of the country. I came in and we went on a date. And I'm all excited about this date. I haven't seen her for a while. And I sit down and she's got a list of things that I'm doing wrong on my date. And so she starts bringing out this list. And the typical doer in me just says this, I don't do that, you do, and here's why you do it. Next. No, I don't do that, you do that. Next. And I'm working through the list. And that's all the farther it's going. And all of a sudden, the Lord just stops me. The peace of God leaves me. And He speaks to me. And He says, look at that woman. Just look at her heart. How often has she been there for you? Who's the one that held you when you were weeping? Who's the one that took care of you when you were sick? Who's the one that had your children? How many times has she laid down her life for you? Who's the one that's gone all these months where she's just alone and she doesn't have anyone to lean on and things break and she's got to sort it out? Who's the one that's done all that? Why don't you look at her heart? And I just stood there and looked across the table at her heart. And I thought, this is a beautiful woman. Just a beautiful woman. And I stopped and I said, Betty, go back to the first thing. What was I doing? And she told me. And I said, why did that make you feel that way? And she told me. And then I asked some more questions and she told me. And I said, I understand what you're saying. I see where that bothers you and I'm going to change that. What was the next thing? And we talked about it and we discussed it. And I said, okay, why do you feel that way? Explain that to me. I want to know. And what else was I doing? And how did I do it? I see how that bothers you. I see how that would really push you over the edge. I see that I'm doing that. We finished up the list and I said, you know, love, I won't change all these things perfectly, but I'm going to change what I can. I'm really going to make a difference in that. And I want you to have the right to remind me of that and just say that, yes, you said that you were going to change those things. and just give me the little reminder so I can do it, because I see how that makes you miserable. And so we talked about that, and we had a great discussion. And then when we ended it, I said this. Now, there's one more thing I want to say. I didn't shoot Kennedy. She said, you didn't shoot Kennedy? I said, no, I wasn't on the grassy knoll. I wasn't up there. I didn't shoot him. And she said, what does shooting Kennedy have to do with it? And I said, I can't confess to something that I didn't do. And my point is this. I did make you miserable, and I'm confessing to the behavior that made you miserable, and I see how my behavior made you miserable, and I see that I need to change my behavior, but what I will not confess to is the motive of wanting to make you miserable. Because it is never my motive to make you a miserable person, and it's never been my motive the whole marriage to do that. My motive has been to love, and it's been distorted, and I've walked in the flesh, and I haven't done that right, and I know that. But I'm not going to confess to a motive that I didn't have. And she said, I know that. I know it's not your motive. And what we had at that point then was a discussion over legitimate issues instead of having a debate. Abiding in Christ doesn't throw you out of legitimate discussions. It throws you in the middle of them. But abiding life will throw you out of the debates and the illegitimate of who's the worst person. And when we're living below the line, and all of us have to decide, how do we want to live? Do we want to live above the line or below the line? I was in Ukraine with one of the pastors there, and he took me over so I could rebuke his wife. Well, when we got all done, he was the one that got the rebuke. And then when we went away, he wasn't happy. And finally, I just stopped there as we were walking. I drew a line in the dirt, and I said, brother, you decide how you're going to want to live right now. Are you going to live on this side of the line, or are you going to live on that side of the line? Now, if you step over that line, I'm expecting you to live over here, and we're not living over here any longer. But you decide what side of this you want to live on. Because if you live on this side of the line, you'll continue to create in your mate the very things that you hate. And you actually begin to create what we call a marriage spiral. And what a marriage spiral is where I'm doing things that create in you the very thing that I'm hating. And so here's what happens. I'm going to nag and nag and nag you because you won't talk to me, which is going to make you withdraw from me. So if you withdraw from me, that means I've got to nag more to get you to talk to me, which is going to make you withdraw more from me. And we hate to see it, but we actually create in the other person the very thing that we hate until we hit a brick wall and we don't know where to go with it. And all we can see in the families and around us is the negatives. And often I'll be talking to people on the phone and I'll end the whole thing by just saying this. Okay, I know all the negatives in the relationship. Are there any positives? I know what's wrong. Could you tell me anything that's right about it? One of the things that I practice with Betty is I'll just walk up to her on just any given day and say, tell me 3 things that are right about me. Tell me 3 things that are right. And after Ray's been visiting, telling her everything that's wrong with me, she really needs that. Because I'll tell you that Ray can really stir things up. He'll get her going on me. And so I'll ask her, tell me 3 things. And of course, the first thing she'll say to me is, no, you tell me 3 things first. Well, I got my 3 things ready. And we forget those things, and we end up focusing just on the negatives. Now, marriage is not as difficult as everyone's made it out to be. Christ is the way, and every other way isn't the way. If you invite Him into your being, it's a homecoming because He created you. And man was made for Christ to dwell in him, not for Adam's life to dwell in him. Adam was the man in process. And now what you are as a child of God is the fulfilled and the real thing. And when Christ comes into you, it's a homecoming. And the amazing thing about Jesus, and it's so much different than every other religion, is that in Jesus, the faith of heaven, the facts of heaven, and the facts of the earth actually meet in that person. That He really is the way, and everything He says flows together. It all fits because He's the glue holding everything together. And both of these things, the facts of earth and the faith of heaven, meet together. They don't in any other religion. and they meet in the person of Christ and what He teaches us and what He tells us and how He was living. Now, He's made life simple enough for us to live it. And marriage is incredibly simple. But here's a problem. If you have a house and this house has 2 huge cracks in its foundation, how many cracks are going to appear in the wall? Hundreds. And so what we do is we get some plaster, we put it over the cracks, and we repaint, but we don't want to fix the foundation because it's a lot of effort. Now, we don't fix the foundation, what happens in a little while? There's more and more cracks. And we keep patching it up and patching it up and patching it up. Do you know that today in publication there are over 25,000 books on marriage? Now, which one are you going to read? Which one's going to help you? Which one's going to fix you? 25,000 books on marriage, with 25,000 different emphases that'll fix it. How can there be that many books? You remember the true story about the Indian that went in the Christian bookstore in London? And Indians are fascinated with books. And he walked into the Christian bookstore and he says, "I've not seen so many books. There are so many books. I didn't know you had so many books." And the owner said, "Oh, yeah, we Christians have lots of books." He said, "This room in here is just on discipleship. And this one over here is just on talking to people. And this one over here is just on studying. And this whole room has books just on family. And this whole room just has books on how to overcome things." And the Indian said, "I'm very, very amazed by all these books. But I'm having one question. Don't Christians know how to do anything?" "Well, you have all those books. Everything's telling you what to do, until you're up to your hips in the do-do." We have 25,000 books because these 2 cracks in relationships we refuse to look at and fix. And if we could fix those, we wouldn't have all the cracks. The problem is, those cannot be fixed in my humanity, in the power of my soul, or in the power of my bodily strength. They can't be fixed. It takes Him. But they're incredibly simple, these 2 things. The first thing is this: husbands, love your wives. It's just that simple. Do you know, I'll tell you men a secret, that if you love your wife, you don't have to listen to her anymore. So if you love, you don't have to listen. Now here's what I mean by that. You women know that there's certain times of the month that you don't make a lot of sense. It's PMS. We know that they said that the reason scientists call it PMS is because when they were trying to name it, they found out that the term mad cow disease was already taken. So they had to go with PMS. Well, anyway, any of us that are married, I mean, we're here to testify. I'm a believer. I believe in it. I know that it exists. And there's certain times of the month where you just don't make any sense. Now, let me ask you a question. In those times of the month, when you know you're not making any sense and your emotions are running wild with you and you're saying things that are just out there, do you really want your husband to listen? Or would you rather have him not listen and come up and put his arms around you and just give you a cuddle, and put you in his lap? What would you prefer? Women want to be loved. And it's a very, very simple commandment to love. And it impacts a lot of a woman's identity. Let's take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk more.